All right, I think we're set. Welcome, John. Thank you. Thank you for joining us today. This is our first of our series where we're trying to help our Abacus customers, doing as much as we can to get them to increase their sales. So, John, you've come highly recommended. You are the guru of social media. I've heard of your name before. I've met you many times, and it's a privilege to be able to sit down with you today. Thank you.
Thank you. No, really, it's equally a pleasure from my side to be able to come and have a conversation and to help out our community as much as we can. I've worked with Abacus for a long time and seen a fabulous Australian business kind of rise up from small beginnings to now what I think is really a premium play in pod solutions, and I think there's really opportunity in this really hard time for us to do some amazing things.
Thank you. Maybe if you could tell our audience a little bit about yourself, and maybe I'll share some of your website as well at the same time.
Yeah, sure. Currently my role is as one of the founding partners and the head of the digital practice at GrowthOps. GrowthOps is a reasonably young company now. We've just passed our second year milestone in March as an ASX listed agency. But previous to that, the roots of the business were really interesting. Basically, there were 8 independent creative and digital agencies that worked together in various different partnership arrangements across different specialities, across creative and advertising and media and technology and apps and digital advertising. And in 2018, we decided that we would partner together formally to become one end-to-end provider of digital marketing and creative services, and as well as management consulting and leadership. And we put that all together to create one new offering called GrowthOps, and so we sold all the individual businesses and became a listed company.
That's awesome.
And so part of that story, of course, is kind of small independent Aussie businesses coming together to become one much bigger business, but equally bringing together lots of specialities into one roof. And my business previous to GrowthOps was called Voodoo Creative, which was started in my garage 14 years ago. And so my specialty has always been in design and digital advertising, and of course social.
Are you able to mention some of the brands that you've worked with, or?
Yeah, of course. Yeah. So we've worked with some of some of Australia's biggest retailers, as well as like many smaller brands and chains as well. From household names like Target and Officeworks, Holden, God bless them, until they left, as well as many fashion brands like Seed, etc. Some technology brands like Dell, and in the food and beverage space, we've been very lucky to work with brands like Chatime or Tea Live, which is a bubble tea brand, Rolled Vietnamese, Soul Origin, etc. So we've certainly played a lot in that space, as well as a big group of indies. I think a common misconception of our business is that we only deal now with larger clients, but we work with everybody.
Okay, that's fantastic. Thanks. Well, I know that our customers, or our Abacus customers, or hospitality owners especially, want to find out as much as they can. And I know we're all time poor, so I want to try to pack as much of your goodness in your experience as we can. I know that, well, depending on how things go, we could speak for weeks and probably do a whole series, and depending on that, we possibly could. But for today, what can we share in terms of how do we, a lot of our customers are now either closed up or that they're trading minimally, doing takeaway. Some of them have now gone online and sort of been able to offer their customers the ability to order on their website and then flow through the POS. Their question is now, okay, now that I'm online, how do I get customers ordering? What's that magic bullet? What's the secret sauce?
Yeah, well, it's interesting. I wish there was a secret sauce. That would be helpful. But I will say that there's a lot of angles to this. And I would say that the first step in being able to really use digital in a meaningful way is to stop and kind of have a look at where you're at with your community, and have a look at how you are communicating to people and what you can do in this time. I think a lot of businesses that got hit really hard during this pandemic and been forced to close are now really trying to struggle to work out whether they can pivot, where they can't. And like you said, the ones that have gone online now have a presence, and we need to reach out to our community and our base. So I think the first thing that you want to do is just make sure that you've done all your hygiene factor stuff right. Make sure that you've actually got a profile that's up to date, that's got all the minimum kind of requirements filled in. A lot of people forget that actually making sure that your listing on Google is up to date, making sure that your addresses are up to date, making sure that if you are, that you have limited trading hours, etc. Those things are updated. And every time you make one of those big fundamental updates, it actually updates anyone that's sort of linked to your pages straight away. So you get a bit of a freebie in terms of making sure that those simple things are up to date and that you're findable.
So your details are correct, because it took me a couple of seconds to tweak when you mentioned hygiene. I thought, okay, you need to let your customers know that, hey, you're wearing gloves. And
I think that is also, I mean, a fundamental hygiene factor without a doubt.
Yep.
Like, but then the component to I think the next step, once you've done that kind of hygiene factor stuff in terms of your profile cleanups, is to start thinking about your mindset around what are you actually going to be doing to tell a relevant story. And I feel like right now there are more eyeballs on social than that have ever been in the history of social existing. Facebook is reporting a 70% increase in usage. We've seen increases on every channel: TikTok, Messenger, Instagram, WhatsApp, even Snapchat is starting to see really big surges in growth, which they haven't seen in a little while. And people are sort of connecting digitally more than ever before. So you have a new challenge in the sense that, yes, there are a lot more eyeballs on this stuff, but you're fighting for attention, and we need to understand how you're gonna grab those people's attention. And in the past, marketing that was pretty effective on social, like just beautiful photos of food and things that whet people's appetite, used to be enough to grab people's attention because they could just pop down and make things happen. But now that's probably not quite enough, and we need to reach a little bit deeper to try to understand how that's going to work. So in terms of having a think about how you can connect with people, I've been throwing around this concept of meaningful connections as much as possible, and it's your number one sort of defensive tactic right now when there's so much attention grabbing stuff out there. It's think about how you can create some sort of memory creating content for your potential customer base, because you want to stand out and be remembered as much as possible, not just right now in terms of potentially getting them to make a purchase decision, but certainly outside of a restricted environment where potentially one day we're going to be told that we can go outside again, and we'll be fighting for everyone's attention as much as possible. And you would love for people to choose you over a viable alternative. And the work in cutting through that noise is going to happen now. The brands and the companies that put in real effort in making memorable connections with people today are going to be the ones that will be already pre-chosen as the place that I want to go to outside of a restricted environment, outside of a restricted trading environment. And that's the key, because you can imagine the visual of almost like a race that's happening, and everyone is lining up to the start line. And the minute that ScoMo pulls the firing gun, everyone's going to run out of the blocks to go places, etc. How are you going to choose where you want to eat? How are you going to choose where you want to shop?
I mean, you talked about telling a story and having those meaningful moments. Can you sort of elaborate on that? How do
absolutely.
How do they create those meaningful moments? How they tell those stories?
Well, I know it's going to sound really simple, but actually storytelling in its own right is really powerful stuff, and is backed a bit by science. I read a study once that sort of indicated that when people tell stories to each other, their brain waves actually fall into sync, in the sense that we actually connect on a deeper level than me telling a story and you listening. We're built as human beings to react to stories and to remember them.
Absolutely.
And most great small businesses and larger brands have stories to tell around the creation of their food, the provenance, the where did they source their product, whether that's, you know, a physical product or a food product, or etc. There are great stories to tell, you know, and in many cases, you know, there's the origin of a recipe or a prominent person in a family, or etc. This sort of content bridges the gap between the types of content that people are interested in looking at the moment in terms of just interesting stories, but also bridges that gap into your product and into your brand, and is one easy way to build this connective kind of shared moment between a brand and a customer. And people love them, right? We like to know where something came from, or how it came to be, or how we ended up on this thing, or why is this thing called this funny name, or so there's countless opportunities in that space where you can go beyond the food porn picture of a product and tell the story behind it, and people really relish that. And the content goes longer, and it plays into some of the algorithmic bonuses that you get on these platforms where video does well, things with audio do well, so you can actually stretch yourself, and hopefully in a non-negative way, you have a little bit more time to do it now than you have before.
Yeah, absolutely. Stories. I think it was a book called Contagious, which is quite funny at this point, where they talk about social currency, and people like to tell stories because it gives them that social currency when they have conversations with people.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah. You talked about meaningful moments. Can you sort of add more to that? You're saying
absolutely
having meaningful moments now, so they'll be remembered, so that when the restrictions are lifted, they'll be the first ones to be visited.
So I wrap up meaningful moments because so much of what you see on a social feed is forgettable content, right? It's stuff that you kind of like scroll past straight away. And a meaningful moment in my book is something that you pause on and stop on. And if you read it, that's a tick. If you read it and then interact with it, it's even better. And if you interact with it and then share it, it's the ultimate kind of your golden ticket, right? But it doesn't always have to be directly related to your product, right? It feels very tempting to try to consistently fill your feed with stuff that's very specific to you. But actually a meaningful moment is something that makes someone stop and connect with you on any level, really. So it could be something that's a story. It could be a joke. It could be product related, of course, but it could be beyond that, something that's a thought starter or a conversation starter or something that's shareable. And it doesn't necessarily have to start and end on social. So it could be that you're documenting something that you did physically, or that you may have done sort of outside of the bounds of just the social media component. So, you know, we've got customers that have been sending physical care packs to their best customers, or showing how they've been helping frontline care, healthcare workers, or etc. And that's a meaningful moment that's then been documented on social, but it's happened outside of social. And all of those little moments work to do what we're suggesting around building this kind of positive memory bank in people's minds, so that, again, later on, you're essentially trying to get to the point where someone has made a choice to come and spend money with you post-restriction. Or, I mean, obviously during restriction, even better, don't get me wrong. But for a lot of Abacus customers, you know, we're restrained. We're really restricted in trade, and despite what we're doing online, there's only so much you can do, and you're really waiting for that moment where you can open and people can come back. You want to try to pre-make that choice or change that person's intent as early as possible, so that there's less competition for that choice when the time comes.
Mm. What's the formula for building a meaningful moment or story that will be remembered? Because I mean, we understand it works, but then they need to be authentic as well. I mean, if I can imagine a business owner will go, oh wow, okay, this is what I need to do, and then you think really hard, and you don't want to get to a point where it looks like you're trying really hard as well.
Yeah, totally.
Is there a step? Is there like here's a 4-step process that will make it look authentic and real, genuine?
I think you nailed on the first one, which is it has to be real, right? You can't be forcing this. So if you can't just make up stories or like flood your feed with stuff that doesn't sort of feel like it's really what's happening now. But so I think your core ingredient is certainly being absolutely true to yourself and true to the brand that you're building. Second thing I think is to start to connect on a one-on-one level. So a lot of brands now are sort of really wishing that they'd spent a bit more time gathering a bit of customer data, wishing that, you know, I just wish I knew the name and email of some of my customers or etc. And where you do have that, now's the time to start to flesh that out a little bit more and see if you can connect on a one-on-one to try to understand, you know, so for example, if you're a bigger brand and you have a subset of audience members that are vegans and some that are not, talking to them about your grandma's roast pork recipe or whatever is probably going to miss the mark massively, right? Because they're definitely not going to be interested in that. So where you can talk around kind of relevancy, that's probably the next big ingredient, right? Are you saying stuff that people actually want to listen to? Because that's a big part of us connecting. There's no more point in me telling you a fanciful story if you're not interested in the topic. So really trying to get to know your customer is another big part of that, part of that ingredient. And then I think the last one might be frequency. For some for some businesses where you kind of know how often somebody comes to your store, I think that now while we're during lockdown, you want to see if there's any way to get as close to replicating that level of frequency. So if they used to come in 3 times a week, if you can somehow touch their lives 3 times a week in some way that's memorable, and it doesn't have to be massive. Like when I say memorable, it doesn't mean fireworks. It just means something that like brightened your day for a minute. Like I don't remember and talk about the coffee that I got in the morning every morning that I used to go get my coffee, but it brightened my morning for that moment. And when I finished my coffee, there was probably a little moment of gratitude before I popped it in the bin. That's enough, right? Like it tasted good, it felt good, etc. How do I replicate that in a digital way so you get this little perk, they remember me, and we build a sense of longing to come back, right? And I think that's the key to it.
What is that way? People, I'm sure, are asking, okay, what is that way? How do I replicate that digitally?
It's the combination of all those little things. I think you start telling great stories, start working out how you can reach out on an individual basis, start potentially appealing to the connection that you had with that customer, even however fleeting it might have been. Ask them potentially to join a mailing list so that you can send them some sort of offer or some sort of welcome back gift. There are a lot of ways where we can potentially try to build that connection with people. And I think now people's propensity to do that and support smaller business in particular is better than ever. There's a real opportunity now to build community because we're seeing community build on a level that I've never seen before, certainly in my time in marketing, where people want to support their local and the place that they used to love going to. Yeah.
So while we're doing this Abacus interview with you, I better put a plug in for us as well. We the ability for you to know your customers. You subscribe to our loyalty module, you can know exactly what your customers are ordering and who they are, and birthdays, and give them that little treat as well.
Exactly right. It is exactly right. And I think those moments are the ones that you remember when you do, like just like in real life, when you remembered someone's order or you remembered someone's name, and those little moments make a difference in that person's interaction with the brand, like instantly. You can do that in a digital way by obviously, if you're in the online space and you're already starting to take advantage of that, reaching out to people, making sure that you're doing their favorites, little touches on the orders, and then sharing those things on social so that other people can take them and share them along the way as well. Think about the things that make you move your dial from scrolling past to stopping to interacting to sharing, and seeing if you can and create those levels of connections with people. And often it's going to come down to, doing something a little bit differently or beyond what you would normally do, to get that connection happening.
Yeah. You mentioned earlier that there's a lot more eyeballs on social media. You talked about Facebook being up 70% or something. You mentioned TikTok, you mentioned WhatsApp, Messenger. I don't think you mentioned Instagram, but there are so many platforms out there for socials, and it's almost impossible to manage all of them. As a business owner, whether you own a large brand where you can afford to pay someone to do it, or you're a mum and dad store who most likely you'll either do it yourself or you get a son or daughter or a nephew or niece to manage that side for you. How important is, I guess it's important, but what I'm trying to ask is, if I don't have those resources, how much am I expected to pay? Everything's always a return on investment at the end of the day, right? If I can't find someone to do it for me, then I need to pay someone to do that. What is the average cost of paying someone to do that? And what is the return on investment on that? And is there ways of measuring? Sorry, these are questions.
Big questions, hairy questions. So when it comes to money, that's a big one, because I think it can really vary depending on how long is that piece of string? Like, how much work are you expecting to do?
Is there a formula for a budget, for example? Let's say you're a cafe. You can say a general rule of thumb is that you spend X amount on wages and stock, and your rent is about 10% of your turnover. So this is some things like that. Should I say 5% of my turnover should be devoted to social media or marketing?
Right. Yeah. So typically, I would have said that 5% is always a good start. In terms of 5% of turnover should be going to some sort of marketing level as a minimum. As a marketer, I tend to skew that higher and say that if you can get to 10, you'll probably see a better outcome depending on where you're focusing it and where you're really driving it. Yep. But it can really vary, right? Because there's just so many variables. Like some places trade so prominently based on location that the marketing kind of effort is hard to measure an ROI on. In other cases, the marketing drives the entirety of an online transaction, and therefore, it's about getting the entire return. I think the key to this is for you to start to work out how you can actually, what is the proposition to measure your ROI, right? And right now, we're talking about building a lot of goodwill rather than a direct, unless you're in the online space and you can actually directly measure, we ran this ad and we made these sales, in which case your ROI is pretty easy to track. In a space where we're really just trying to build a connection with people so that later on you can get the payback on that, it's a little bit fuzzier to work out your ROI. And I think what you want to be doing is seeing as much as possible that if you're in a position to do some of the connection building stuff yourself, that's a fantastic start. When you want to engage an agency, you want to talk to them about your objective. You want to talk to them about what you're seeking to get out of the experience, and also be pretty clear about setting your budget expectations so that both parties can enter into a really clearly set out relationship where we know what winning looks like. I would say, broadly speaking, if you're a small business, you won't really see a lot of result if you're spending less than $100 a week, broadly speaking, on the platform cost somewhere along the way, like in places like Facebook, etc. And I would say, broadly speaking, for the vast majority of brands, your Facebook ecosystem, which is basically Facebook will own Facebook itself, Instagram, Messenger, and WhatsApp, all of which are now places that you can do some sort of activity. That's probably easiest, lowest hanging fruit. You're going to reach the vast majority of Australians, vast majority of demographics, and get really pretty quick exposure. you can then get much more specific and much more targeted with different audiences on different channels and et cetera, et cetera. And any good agency is going to be able to help you make a good choice on that if you want to go down that pathway. But how much you pay your agency to help you really going to vary on how big you want to go and how much, what you want to try to get out of that. If they're creating beautiful content for you, there's obviously the cost of production, et cetera, which varies so much. It's hard to comment on that.
Cool. We had a brief chat last week, and what stuck in my mind is you mentioned something about it's moments like these where the businesses need to be both defensive and offensive as well. Can you sort of go through that in a bit of detail?
Yeah, of course. Yeah. So this concept, I think, is a really interesting one in the sense that I think the natural reaction for most people is to go into a defensive mode. As soon as COVID hit and lockdowns hit, it was hunker down, right? Get into defensive mode as soon as possible, protect what you have, and try to limit your loss as much as possible. And this is what I was sort of talking about, this idea of prepping yourself for the other side, because whilst a defensive strategy around kind of, reducing your rent and focusing down and cut all your marketing costs, etc., is really good around self-preservation, that it doesn't do anything really outside of surviving, which is super critical. So please don't dismiss that. Yes, surviving is important, but post-surviving, actually flourishing is a really, really critical part. And if you are to imagine that we're all lining up for a race to get people's attention on the day that people are allowed to go outside and you're allowed to open up your place of business again, everyone will more or less be shouting for your attention at the same time. With a group of consumers that have less, probably less money to spend than they did before, right? Because everyone's had a bit of a financial shock, right? Regardless of whether you've lost your income or not, I think everyone is reassessing where they're going to spend some of their discretionary spend. And they've been kind of locked down for a while. So I think that there is going to be a high propensity to go out and do stuff, but there's only so much stuff you can do. There's only so many meals you can eat in a day. There's only so many things you can shop for. And so when everybody is open and everyone is going to be asking you to spend their money with them, what's your tactic to get their attention from now? And that's got to be your offense strategy. That's got to be your attack plan. How do you get in front of people and do it well? And you need to give it thought now, not when we're open, because when we're open, it's probably too late, right? So I would highly recommend everybody start to think in that kind of two-phased mode. What can you do now to protect what you have? What can you do now to make sure that you've gotten mind share of people for when we're allowed to trade again? Because at some point we will be allowed to trade again. It's coming. It will happen. And you want to be as prepped as you can. And those that don't do their homework now, I think will be at a disadvantage later.
For the lazy students in the class who don't want to do their homework, but you're the teachers giving the questions on the exam, saying these are the questions. What is it that we need to do to get us in the forefront of their minds? The lazy students are asking, what's the answer?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, and a good teacher never gives the answer. I think that because you got to learn yourself. The truth is, it's different for every business, right? So, but fundamentally, I think the best advice I can give you is to think about yourself in the consumer shoes. So you are both the business manager, but you are also a consumer, and so think about it. Where do you now consider yourself in terms of your ability to buy? Where are you going to go out? How are you going to support local business, etc.? What are the triggers that would take to potentially help start to influence your decision making? And some tools that can help you do that is to start to do some research. Actually just ask your customer, what do you want to see from us? What is your propensity to buy? At GrowthOps, we have a research division where we're actually asking Australian consumers about their sentiment every single day since lockdown, right? Okay. And at the beginning, we saw anxiety was super, super high. Anxiety is actually dropping and boredom is on the rise, which is really interesting, right? So people are bored, they want to get out, they do want to support local business, but their families, in particular, families with kids, they're quite nervous about money. And younger people, younger generations are also a little bit nervous about money. So there's going to be the emergence of a new type of frugal where people are going to be quite savvy with their money. They want to pick people based on a personal belief or a connection, etc. And I think that's probably fairly true for the vast majority of Australians. So perhaps the closest thing to an answer you're going to get is, how are you going to resonate with those people? How are you going to build a personal connection? Start building it today, right? By linking to them, by interacting with them, by asking them questions, by getting to know them better, by providing them fantastic stories that they can consume, by potentially moving into online and seeing if you can pivot and deliver something to them in an online fashion. All of those things will help build part of the strategy on the other side of this, where you could be on the front foot. People who haven't done any of that or very little of that will be at a disadvantage to those that have, because you will come out of your lockdown period with a propensity to connect with the brands that you have a connection with.
Okay, cool. Thank you. I think you've provided so much words of wisdom and knowledge for our viewers. So thanks so much for your time today, John. Really appreciate it.
My pleasure, really. And I would say, please always reach out to people. I think you're going to be surprised how much more people are willing to help each other right now. We are genuinely all in this together, and get out there and make some great content.
Thank you. Thanks so much. And those who want to reach out to you, John Yanny at GrowthOps. Thank you.
Happy to help.
Thank you, guys.